Now welcome to another lightning response video, where this time I'm going to try to do a few different questions, starting with this one from Sam Wilson, who asked, "Hey Thor, wanted to get your thoughts on this. Do you think Anakin was always destined to become Vader? Obviously within the context of the movies, one could easily say yes. Yet for me, I don't think it's that easy of an answer, and would argue that he actually wasn't. Anyway, would love to hear your answer for this. May the Force be with you." And no, I don't think he was ever meant to become Darth Vader. Rather, he was meant to be found by, which he was, and then trained by Qui-Gon Jinn. That was his original destiny given to him by the Force as the chosen one. That is until Darth Maul threw a big wrench into the plans and killed Qui-Gon. Which is why that fight between them, between Maul, Qui-Gon, and Obi-Wan, is called the Duel of the Fates. Because the destiny or fate of Anakin was sort of on the line here, as well as the fate of the whole galaxy. And if Qui-Gon kills Maul, or at the very least survives the fight, I think he trains Anakin in the more, shall we say, traditional ways, focusing on following the will of the Force rather than following the will of the Senate or strictly adhering to the Jedi Code. Which then means it's unlikely that Anakin ever befriends Palpatine, especially with Qui-Gon almost certainly being much more of a, shall we say, father figure to Anakin than Obi-Wan ended up being. I think those two were more like big brother, little brother than father-son kind of dynamic. Meaning it wouldn't have been so easy for old Palps to weasel his way in, since there was no inherent role for him to fill in Anakin's life. I also think it's unlikely Padme and Anakin ever become a thing either, keeping in mind what sort of reignited it after all those years, after they hadn't seen each other since they were kids in The Phantom Menace, was none other than Palpatine recommending Obi-Wan, and thus Anakin, be the ones to protect Padme during the assassination attempts in Episode 2. I mean, part of the reason Palpatine no doubt recommended Kenobi in the first place was because, after getting to know Anakin all those years, he's realized, or been told by him, considering Anakin claims he thinks about Padme every day, that he still harbors strong feelings for Padme, and thus putting them together could potentially, for Palpatine, be something he could exploit down the road. The interesting questions then become, how does Anakin eventually fulfill the prophecy and destroy the Sith and bring balance if he doesn't become Darth Vader first? And do the Clone Wars still happen? And I think the answer to that latter question is yes. Something almost certainly ignites the Clone Wars, they still happen. But as for the former, how does Anakin fulfill the prophecy? Well, likely at some point he, or they, assuming Qui-Gon is still around, and there's no reason to assume he wouldn't be, I think they somehow figure out that Palpatine is the Sith Lord, and they, or just Anakin, expose this and take him down. And then after this, after the Jedi see that all this time, for all these years, and especially during the Clone Wars, they were so blinded they didn't even realize they were listening to a Sith Lord, that one was right under their nose the whole time as the Supreme Chancellor, I think they likely start to go back to more of the, again, shall we call them, traditional Jedi ways. The ways that Qui-Gon would have taught Anakin, that focusing more on the will of the Force is the way a Jedi should be, and not so much about politics and the rules of the Jedi Code and all of that. And then at some point, I think not only does Anakin become a master, finally, but he takes Yoda's place as Grand Master of the Jedi Order, and that's the end. But also the beginning of our next question, which comes to us from Master Prick, who asked, "Hey Thor, do you think if Padme had survived, she could have saved Anakin?" And I want to initially say no, but considering the very first thing Anakin does upon waking up in the suit is ask, "Where's Padme? Is she safe?" I think the possibility is there, remote as it may be, because you then have to consider it was a Luke who eventually did bring Anakin back, and he was, of course, a connection back to Padme for him. Also, keep in mind, one of the last things Padme says to Obi-Wan before she dies is that there's still good in him, meaning somehow, despite the chokehold, she hasn't entirely given up on him. And sure, it's meant to sort of tie back or tie forward to Luke one day feeling good in him as well, but either way it does tend to imply she hasn't given up on him fully. I'd even go so far as to say what truly and fully 100% cements Anakin as a Sith, not that he wasn't at like a 99 before it, but I think the final straw that breaks the camel's back is learning that he killed Padme. I think that is the moment that there is no going back for him anymore, since she was the reason he kind of fell in the first place. Not that it was her fault, mind you, but you get what I mean. he fell to the dark side trying to save her and then ends up without her, and here he is on the dark side, and it's the only thing he has left at that point. Okay, next up here we have a question from Danko Kamchevsky, who asked, "Hey Thor, I have a question regarding Luke giving Grogu a choice. Force sensitivity is a rare thing in the galaxy. The Jedi have the right way of dealing with the Force, and then on the other side is the dark side, which is easy to succumb to. Is it wise for Jedi to just let Force sensitives go? What are the chances of going dark once left to your own devices?" And I'd have to say there's a pretty decent shot of falling to the dark side if you've begun your Jedi training and then leave the Order for whatever reason. Though the Jedi who do indeed let them go if they want to, as we saw with Ahsoka, they're no doubt kind of hoping that the lessons you've learned along the way, the lessons they've taught, that they're going to stick with you and you're going to remember how dangerous the dark side is and how dangerous it is to be using the Force selfishly. I also think the Jedi may just happen to try to keep an eye on you, especially if you leave and they feel you're leaving for some sort of selfish purpose, that you're going to fall to the dark side, and one of the reasons you want to leave is to partake in that. Another interesting question I think that kind of comes out of this is, what if a Force sensitive is never found and trained at all? I get this question a lot as well. And to that I'd say there's a pretty small chance that you're ever going to go to the dark side all on your own or become anything close to resembling a Sith in terms of power level without any previous training whatsoever. I think what Luke said in The Mandalorian is right on point.
He is strong with the Force, but talent without training is nothing.
Meaning, sure, if you're never trained, you're going to have what looks to be maybe some incredible luck and skill in certain areas, but you're never going to truly use the Force or get near your potential. Also, it's kind of been implied that if you don't learn how to use it when you're younger, it'll start fading as you grow older. There's even this interesting thing in the new Thrawn novels where Chiss children with the Force, though they don't call it the Force, they act as what's called Skywalkers, no relation, and they can navigate the chaos out in the unknown regions. They don't have normal hyperspace lanes out there because of all sorts of cosmic anomalies that will move and shift and wreak havoc on computers and such. And they can navigate all this in real time, but as they get older, they will lose this ability until it is gone entirely. But anyway, if you look at, say, Anakin as an example of not being trained, before he of course does get trained, he had the highest midichlorian count ever, which likely means a tremendous potential there, maybe the most potential in the history of the Jedi or history of Force-sensitive beings. But if he's never found and trained, he probably spends his life being a little more than a great pod racer, and then maybe seeing his knack for it kind of fade as he gets older and the Force leaves him because he's never been trained how to use it. But moving on, let's do this question from Josh, who asked, "Hey Thor, might be a stupid question, but is being a Sith actually a crime? Sure, we all know, and they, Jedi, know it's bad and it's selfish and corrupt, but did the Republic actually outlaw it at the time, or is it simply what a Sith does that's the crime, rather than being one?" And that's not a stupid question, and it's also not a crime. This even gets addressed in the novelization of Revenge of the Sith, which is a book I highly recommend to anyone who loves that film. It's one I've been meaning to read again since it's been almost 20 years since I read it the first time. Anyway, when Windu and the boys come to arrest Palpatine in the book, he points out that they're basically persecuting and arresting him for his beliefs or his philosophy, which is interesting because they really don't have any sort of evidence against him, no real justification for his arrest other than being a Sith. They're not even aware at that point the extent he's been kind of manipulating both sides of the war. And so again, to answer the question, technically no, being a Sith is not illegal, but if you're a Sith, you're probably doing a lot of illegal things. Alright, our last question then comes to us from X Dreams, who asked, "Hey Thor, was always wondering your take on Return of the Jedi title meaning. Ever since I saw it, I always interpreted as the return of the Jedi, Anakin. I've had this viewpoint for as long as I remember, as early as 1988 when I was 11, since though most of us know it was just a change of the original title, Revenge of the Jedi, and Lucas changed it because it doesn't fit the Jedi way. And I think when I was a kid, I always thought, without giving it too much thought to be honest, that it referred to Luke because of his bold declaration to the Emperor that he's a Jedi like his father before him. But upon more years of thought and further review, I think it means the Jedi as a whole, which is of course facilitated by both Luke and Anakin. I think it means they helped the Jedi return and both became one at the end of the film, or became one again in the case of Anakin. Though honestly, I like that it's kind of open to interpretation, and I don't think there's a wrong way or a right way to look at the title. Though I do think Revenge of the Jedi, I agree with Lucas who changed it. I do think that would have been a wrong title for that film, considering revenge is not the Jedi way. Well, that's all I got for you this time. Now it's your turn to take to the comments below and tell me what you think the answer is to any of these questions, or you could of course leave your own question for me to answer by starting your comment off with "Hey Thor" and then asking away. Whatever you choose to do, leave a comment below and let's talk some Star Wars. And until next time, thanks for watching.